Alright, today we're going to talk about the role of the QA tester. So, QA stands for quality assurance, and it's basically the people that play the game to break it. They'll play a level over and over and over, multiple different ways, choose multiple different routes, and just try everything out in the game to try to get to the point where they find errors, glitches, bugs, things that they can make the programmer aware of so that they can work them out. Those random things like maybe the player dies when he shouldn't have, he gets stuck in a wall, he doesn't advance to the next level. Any of those typical errors that we often see in our AAA games, right? We find little random bugs sometimes. And it's even more common in these smaller games. We have to make sure that we go through each of the levels multiple times. We can't just go through and we do it correctly the first time and advance on and say that's it. We have to try a lot of different routes. We have to purposely lose health, die, advance, collect coins, not collect them, whatever's going on in your game. You want to go through all the different scenarios many, many times to make sure that every possible action works the way that it should. If something doesn't, you need to record it. So there's a couple things that help us record when we're doing our testing. The two requirements for the contest and for your grade are test cases and the test plan. So the first thing I want you to focus on is the test plan. In order to do this, you're going to open up both the sample test plan and the test plan templates. This, if you put them side by side, the PDF version gives you instructions on how to do things, and the template is where you can actually fill things in. So you're going to start by actually putting down your team name, change the date, and the QA tester's name. The table of contents you do not have to change. We can update that at the end. You don't have to change anything here. It's fine. So we're going to start at introduction. So it says this test plan has been created to communicate the test approach to team members. It includes objectives, scope, schedule, risks, and approach. And that's fine to leave it that way. If you want to put it in your own words, which is what I would recommend, feel free to do so. It's basically just saying, what are we trying to achieve? So with your objectives, I give you the instructions that say, put your goals and objections from your OneNote page charter here. Delete this line when you do. So you'll delete what's here, and you can just start typing in directly from that OneNote page what your goals and objectives are. So that's not something that you have to come up with. It should already be done in your charter applications. You just need to copy and paste it over. Next is your team members. So you're going to fill in their name, full names, and what they're doing. So these are just some examples. Tester, DBA, asset, project manager, programmer. Yours may be a little different. Okay, they may have more positions than those. They may have less. You may have 5 members, whatever. So you'll do this according to your game. If you need to add a line because you do have 5 members, just go to the end of the last box and hit enter, and it'll add one there for you. The next section is our assumptions and risks. So I have on here that this section lists assumptions that are made specific to this project. Okay, so this first assumption is just an example. You're going to delete this out and put your own. Their example is delivery of the product is in a format that the team can check it into CVS. So in our case, hopefully the delivery is in a product, or is in a format that your QA team can test. In other words, you'll probably want to mention that it's going to be an EXE or executable file, and it's going to be playable on Windows PC, which is what your QA tester has access to. So something along those lines. Now, you may have more assumptions than that. You can absolutely come up with more, which is what I would recommend, but you should at least have one. The next section here is risks. I give you some sample risks. I do not want you to use these word for word. Now you can use them as a risk. I would love you to come up with a minimum of 2. 3 or 4 would be much better, if not more. So the one example that I give you is scope increases. So as your programmers become more familiar with the game engine, they want to keep adding more to it, right? They want to just keep adding, hey, you know what, I know how to do this unique score system now, so let's do that. even though it wasn't a part of the initial design, and you're getting towards the end of it, right? So the scope is increasing. What you have to do increases. You need to really take a step back and figure out if that's what's best for your game, okay? So scope increase could absolutely be one of your risks, but make sure you put that into your own words. Mitigation plan. What that means is mitigation means how are you going to stop this risk from happening? How are you going to mitigate this risk or lower this risk? Okay, so for my scope increase, I put that at each iteration or at each release, right? Our alpha, beta release versions of our game. We're going to monitor functionality, okay? We're going to monitor functionality and prioritize things so that our scope doesn't get out of hand. So we'll have that group meeting and we'll say, you know what, we don't need this advanced scoring system. Our basic scoring system was good enough. We don't need to increase the scope here. So that is how I would mitigate that. You're going to once again use your own examples, but this is a sample of what could happen. The second example is weekly delivery may not be possible. So if your QA tester wants to test weekly, that might not be possible because we're not going to have class time every single week. And your group may not be able to meet outside of school because a lot of groups don't have time for that. How we're going to reduce that risk is we'll set aside certain days of the month to stay on track, and we'll deliver a version that can be tested whenever we're able to, either through OneDrive or a flash drive or OneNote or some other option. So that's absolutely an option if we want the QA tester to keep doing their testing throughout. The next thing is test approach. Now this is a complicated section. Okay, this probably takes the most explanation, and it may be something that you want to take notes on, and you may want to pause and rewind this video when needed, okay, because it's very important for your QA tester to understand what their test approach is. So the instructions here tell you to write in full sentences what you're using and why, okay, and there's a few different parts. So the first part that I list here is describe your different test types. And I give you some examples. Unit, integration, and functional are required. So most of you probably don't know what that means unless you were a QA tester in the past or have done that outside of school, or maybe a little research on your own time. So at the bottom here, I give you a description of what each of those mean. I highly recommend you read through these and really understand them. So unit tests are the first part of testing. They are what begins very quickly, okay? The goal of unit testing is to isolate each part of the game, each individual little piece, and make sure they're correct. The examples that I give you is you're going to test player movements as a user test or a unit test, probably right at the beginning, right? Because your movements are one of the first things that your programmer does. When they get that done, they can just shoot you over a copy so that you can test out those. Unit tests can also be done by the programmer themselves. They're not always going to want to give you a copy when they finish. Oh, look, I got 10 lines of code done. There's a new option. Test it for me. A lot of unit tests will be done by the programmer themselves, which is absolutely fine. You just need to document that. So that way, your unit tests are being done constantly and continually. Whenever your programmer hits that play button, that's a unit test. So keep that in mind. It's those little tiny individual sections that they're testing are those units, okay? Integration tests are tests that they test an entire subsystem. Okay, so they're not testing your whole game. They're not testing that end result, right? But they are testing how things work together. So the example that I give you is that the OBJ player code, movements, collisions, and rewards could be one integration test. You're basically doing all of that whole integration of what that player is going to be able to do. And you're testing all of that at once. So you're integrating those unit tests into one. Then another integration test might be the OBJ player and OBJ enemy to make sure all their code works together, okay, and is integrated properly. So Integration tests means combining more than one thing, where unit tests are individual things being tested. So integration tests could be done by your programmer, but a lot of times that's at least sometimes when you'll start passing it on to that QA tester to do some additional testing, to actually try to play it to break the game, figure out what's going on if there is a bug, and send it on to the programmer to fix. Functional test. So functional are end-to-end scenarios that your players are going to be engaging in. So this is where you're actually going to play the game over and over and over, the entire levels to test them out. Not just individual things, but the whole game itself. Okay, that's your functional test. And like I said, you should do multiple scenarios. It shouldn't be, hey, I'm going to try to advance through the game to the end and win. Great. That is one functional test. Now, you need to do a scenario of dying. And dying many different times. You need to achieve different awards. Maybe you're getting different things throughout the level. Check multiple score intervals. Okay, are all the score intervals working properly? And so on. So you're going to do several functional tests, but it really is end-to-end scenarios. Okay, so whether that is your health being depleted or staying at 100, your lives being depleted, your score being as high as it can, multiple functional tests. Okay, so now the second thing to our test approach, after you talk about unit integration and functional, and when you're doing those, and you don't have to give these descriptions, you can just say unit integration and functional, but you need to know what that means. You're the QA tester. You need to not only know what it means, but be able to describe that to other people in your group and answer questions the judges may have. Oh, so when are you doing your unit testing? You should be able to say, oh, actually, the programmer's doing the unit testing because we're doing it as we go, so whenever they complete something like player movements, they then test it automatically. You should be able to repeat that and know what your role is and what's going on. So please look at these until you have a good grasp on what each one means. Now, who is testing? Once again, that might depend. Okay, so whole team approach, QA personnel only, whole team and customer. I would definitely recommend whole team and customer approach, but this is once again up to you guys. You're making the rules here. So if you're doing a whole team approach, that might be where your unit tests are solely your programmer. Your integration tests are split up between the programmer and the QA tester. And then your functional tests are split up between everyone in your team playing through, your QA tester playing through multiple functional test scenarios, and then you giving a beta version to your customers to play through and see if they can then find errors that you guys missed. My recommendation is always whole team and customer testing, but you choose the approach that works for you and describe how that's going to be done. And then your defect and change management cycles. You can combine these into one. You can leave them separate. It's up to you. But basically, it's how are you going to log your bugs, okay, log the defects that you're finding, log any errors, any critical errors or anything that you're finding, and how are you going to get them onto your programmer so that they can change it. And then the same with change management, how are you going to tell them this needs changed? Okay, so those can be, like I said, combined, unless you want them in two different places. I would recommend OneNote or OneDrive, but you can absolutely choose a different way. You can just walk over and tell them. You can have a log. Now, the second part of this is you're probably going to have test cases to be able to do. You're probably going to use test cases to log some of those defects, but you might want to have something in the meantime, some system worked out with your programmer on what they prefer before your test cases are actually complete. Your next section here is test environment. Okay, so where are you going to test? In class, at home, library, combination, put in a full sentence. This is going to be quick and easy. You're going to delete out what's here and put where you're going to do that at. It might be a combination of places, especially if you're going to put it on Dropbox and have a beta version for customers to play. Milestones and deliverables. So you're going to fill in start dates, don't fill in finish yet, for the different parts of testing. So test planning should be right now, right? You're planning right now. That's why you're doing this document. You have your test case document, so you're going to put whatever date it is when you plan on doing this. First deploy to QA. So like I said, the first part of testing is unit. So you may not set this date. You may have to ask the programmer, when are you going to start your initial coding? And actually have a few things finished. So that's the date that you'll put here, because that programmer is probably going to be doing that unit testing, right? Integration testing is the next step. So once again, check with your programmer or your project manager when they expect to have multiple pieces done that they can combine and then test. And then functional testing, you're probably not going to start at the earliest would be February. Being able to play end-to-end scenarios, maybe even March. I know we had a few games last year that they went down to the wire, like April 1. So sometime February through March, you guys will have to talk about that. And release to the production is April for everyone. So everyone should have an April date for that. And the deliverables, what you're turning in, as you can see, this is already done for you, okay? You don't have to change this section. This is more just for your information. You should really start to do your test plan and test cases. You're not going to finish them because you're not going to actually be testing yet, but you will do them then. Your test results, April. Okay, you should not have it before April. If you get done earlier, great. But a lot of times if you get done too early, so you guys are doing your end-to-end testing in December or January, that probably says you don't have enough features and functionality to make your game relevant in the industry, even in a free-to-play industry. Okay, so keep that in mind. Being ahead of the game is great, but not if you are sacrificing quality. And then test status report. Hopefully you're doing that throughout your project, right? Hopefully that's the case. So if you have any questions on this, let me know. The other piece of QA is test cases. So test cases is a little more straightforward. So you're going to delete my instructions out that basically tell you to write down every single thing you're going to be testing. So the first thing that I put is verify that the start button works. Click the start button is how you would actually test it. The expected result is that it will take us to the first level. And then, did it pass or fail? And any comments. Okay, so if it gave you a critical error or something, you're going to want to record that there for your programmer. Otherwise, for now, as you're just outlining what needs tested, these three boxes should be blank until the end-to-end testing, that functional testing at the end. But this, I give you 7 lines, you should have more like 50, okay? It should not be this basic, simple game where you say, test movements, test rewards, test levels, done. You should have every single thing recorded. So verify start button works, verify pause works, verify restart works. If you have load and save, you need to go for all of your directions for your players. Do you have up, right, down, left? Do you have a jump option? Do you have a double jump option? Do you have projectiles or shooting? Do you have inventory, a way of collecting things? Then you can move into your other players. Do you have enemies? Do they have AI? Do they shoot things? Do they collect things? Do they collide with the player? You're advancing from level 1 to level 2, 2 to 3. All of these things should be on a separate line. So you can see where this document should be massive. It shouldn't be a few little things here. It should be massive. So any feature that's going into your game will absolutely need tested, including things like walls, gravity, platforms, barriers, doors. Anything that your game will have needs tested. So this document should be pretty massive. Okay, it should have a lot on it. You should not skimp out on this. You want to make sure that every feature gets tested and every possible scenario gets tested, because the one that you leave out may be the one that has a glitch. Okay, and you don't want to find that out after the fact. Any questions on QA testing, come see me. The majority of you QA testers should have more than just this job, because once you fill out these 2 documents, you don't have anything to do until integration testing starts, which may be January, February. So you need to make sure that you're helping out other members in your group and staying busy.